Guppies to groupers, tropical and marine fish in the home aquarium. Your host, Paul Spees.
There is no question in my mind that the most beautiful creatures in the world are found at the bottom of the sea. You look at that brilliant color and those bizarre markings and the combinations of them, no question, the bottom of the sea. Wait, I don't want to get all the bird lovers in the world down on my back. I like birds. But I guess it's only natural that I would lean toward the water world, huh? Well, it's also only natural that people have been wanting to keep these beautiful things in their living room for a long period of time. So as a result, we found over 100 years ago people with a bowl, some kind with one fish or two fish in there. But that had its limitations. They were limited to what they could find in the tidal ponds after the tide went out. They were limited in the fact that every couple of days you take the bowl and go back down and get some more water because these fish have a way of poisoning their own water, if you will. So the state of the art was rather poor in those days, and it stayed pretty much like that for over 100 years. Up until the point maybe about 20 years ago, there was a sudden flourish of interest in the hobby again. In fact, I mentioned one other time here that I had a 26 stainless flared aquarium, beautiful thing, set up. So like I say, about 20 years ago. That was the ill-fated one, if you remember, that the semi-truck backed over. Maybe I better explain that in case you weren't with us, but I had a pet shop, and the truck was making a delivery and was backing up, pushed the door of the truck through the front of the pet shop, knocked the aquarium over, that kind of thing. So I don't know how that one would have ended out, but generally, those efforts were almost doomed to failure. Now we're talking on the basis of the home aquarium because municipal aquariums were, doing their thing. They take a different approach to this whole thing. But in the home aquarium, that was almost doomed to failure back in the good old days because, well, for one thing, the filters weren't up to speed. They weren't good enough for what we were trying to do. The salt itself left a lot to be desired. It broke down in the long-term consideration. And the fish, well, it was a sort of a catch-as-catch-can kind of a thing in those days, and the price was rather exorbitant. So that flourish came and went, if you will. And now recently here in the last 5 or 6 years, with the advent of better, more sophisticated equipment, choice of many salts, all of which work well, and new catching techniques, the advent of the skin diver into the picture, all of a sudden we have available many beautiful species like we see in the aquarium here. Like the old rock beauty there, Holocanthus tricolor. Beautiful fish, one of the angels, a little bit aggressive, but a beautiful fish. And if you think that yellow in that guy is attractive, you ought to see an all-yellow fish. Well, he's almost all yellow, at any rate. And this lemon peel is just brilliant. There he is. Look at that. Except for the eyes. Look at the blue eyes on that lemon peel. That's Centropyge flavissimus. Beautiful fish. Now, if you're not satisfied with just beautiful color, how would you like to go with the old bird wrasse there? Look at the schnozola on that guy. That's Gomphosis varius. Nice color, unusual shape. Reminds you a little bit of the old freshwater elephant noses. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the old blue line grouper. And he tends to hide up here in the coral. Maybe I can scare him out a little bit here. There he goes. That's Cephalophyllus bonacci. And he's doing his thing under the coral piece there again. That name ends in I. Bonacci, and all that means is it was named after a man. If it had been named after a woman, it would have been A-E. If it was named after a location, E-N-S-I-S, ensis. Like, for instance, in our, one of the Geophagus, Braziliensis. So, beautiful fish. There he is doing his thing. Brilliant blue lines in the guy, and you can see what I was discussing there with that bonacci. Well, we're going to talk about the saltwater hobby today, and what better place to start with the aquarium again. Let me get an aquarium because there's some other considerations in this phase of the hobby First of all, let me say that when you think of the typical freshwater aquarium, in terms of how many fish in how many gallons, you've got to forget that with the saltwater game. That has to change. You need a bigger aquarium right off the bat. Minimum of 30 gallons, in my estimation. And if you can get into a 50 or 100 or something in that range, you're going to have a lot better luck. But in general, the aquariums are basically the same aquarium is available. We don't want any metal exposed. We can talk about that in a little bit, but these have this one-piece molded frame we discussed before. The corners are bonded with the silicone, so it's basically all glass and plastic, non-toxic plastic. The other point that we want to make about this particular aquarium that I have here, this is a 40-gallon breeder, and you notice that for the depth of the aquarium, now this is about 14, 16 inches deep, but look at the surface area. That's an important consideration in the saltwater game. Because of all the dissolved material that's already in saltwater, it has less capability of absorbing oxygen than freshwater, than the same amount of freshwater. And yet it's more critical in this game to have a superabundant oxygen supply. That's why we need all the oxygenation that you see in the saltwater aquarium and the vibrant, bubbling types of filtration you need to change this surface area over constantly. That's where the oxygen goes back in. Other things are happening there. But the bigger the surface area, the better off we're going to be. As I say, you can get around that a little bit by using aeration and filtration. But probably the ideal shape aquarium would be a cake pan, something like that. Now let me put this back. If they ever want me to name this model, I'm going to call it Hernia 1, because I'm getting very old with these gadgets we lug around. Now, as I said, consider the minimum size aquarium in this game to be about a 30-gallon one. Now go as big as you want. You know, we're looking here at the beginning at this 220. That's a huge aquarium. And it's not the kind of thing that you can go down to a pet shop and pick up in your Volkswagen, though. Maybe you can put your Volkswagen in it, but the limiting factor in the size of the aquarium is not what the industry can build, necessarily. It's what can be handled comfortably. There are bigger aquariums, this special-made aquarium, but this aquarium alone weighs 440 pounds, just the aquarium. So the limiting factor is going to be how big of an aquarium can be handled reasonably. That's 5/8 plate glass, the sides of this, 3/4 inch plate glass in the bottom. So a huge aquarium. Okay, so basically what we can say about this, the bigger the aquarium, the better luck we're going to have. Now, along with the aquarium, we want to talk immediately about a full cover for it, for a number of reasons. And I'm talking about a cover similar to this. Now, this one has a full glass cover on it. This is a sliding type, you see here. A lot of them have a flip-up cover. But we definitely want to have a full cover on there for a number of reasons. Primary reason is evaporation. Now, you remember when we were talking about the freshwater aquarium, and we said that evaporation just leads to trouble. Well, it's even more critical in the saltwater aquarium, because when evaporation takes place, remember now, only water leaves the aquarium. It leaves behind everything else. Well, that everything else includes all the minerals and everything that are in freshwater, but in the saltwater aquarium, it also includes an awful lot of salt. And as the evaporation continues, the salinity in the aquarium goes up. And despite the fact that these fish are rather adaptable with respect to the salinity, we want to minimize that, thus the full cover. And although the glass covers the entire aquarium, there's always a little plastic strip that you can whittle to make, room for the air hose, the heaters, that kind of thing. Not a problem. The cover does a lot of other things. It keeps fish in. And boy, I can think down through the years, a dozen incidents when I wish I would have had a better cover, or friends of mine. I remember, this was like 20 years ago, a friend of mine who ran an importing business, handled fish, called me up one night. He said, "Hey, Paul, maybe you want to come up tomorrow morning." He said, "I've got some octopuses coming in." That's right, octopuses. That's proper plural. It's a Greek word. He said, come on up. So, boy, I was there bright and early. I'd never gotten close to one. Never really got a chance to look at one. So I was up there bright and early waiting for him to open up. Now, he had them in a 50-gallon aquarium. I think there were 6 of them. They're wee little guys, 50-gallon aquarium. And he had put a screen cover over it. What did we know in those days? And he had a couple of rocks sitting on top because he had heard that they climb out. Well, they climbed out anyway. They all got out. They were all over the place. Most of them dead. The rest of them in pretty bad straits. But climbing things like that are going to get out. You've got to cover the aquarium. The fish themselves, if they just get frightened, a sudden light shock, a bang or something, bingo, they take off. And boy, it's as fast moving as some of these fish are. They're out of that aquarium in no time. So you've got to get the cover on there. I can remember here quite recently when we were in Washington at one of the trade shows. And when we got ready to leave, I was going to stay on for a couple of days. The producer of the series, old Robert, he was going to go back home, so it was his job to take back the fish that some friends of ours at the show had given us. They gave us some beautiful fish. And one of them was a moray eel, about that long, so big around, mean as tin skunks. You got to see these things. Teeth, holy crap, they got teeth in their ears. They're really bad duty. So we got a moray eel. Put all these fish in their separate bag. Now he's going back the next day, so we scrounge up a couple little aerators, some hoses, stones, and that. And in his room that night, he's got these styrofoam boxes sitting around with the bags open and the air hoses and all the jobby-doos running. We want to make sure that we minimize the shock to these fish with all the handling and everything else. But he opened up the bag with the old moray eel in it. Now, we don't do that. He'll never do it again. Anyway, sometime during the night, the old moray eel got out. And eels do this. They climb right out of the aquarium. But he climbed out of the bag. We had no net. What are you going to do? Well, let me sum this one up very quickly. Someplace in Washington, some cleaning lady got an awful shock when she was doing her sweeping that day because she must have run across Mr. Meany. Maybe he was dried out by then. But get the aquarium, get the cover right with it. It's too critical to the success of the aquarium. Now, along with the cover, what goes over it? Good light. And there are a lot of different kinds of light. There are fluorescents, there are incandescent. They all have their place, as we'll discuss here in a minute. This particular fixture is a plastic. It's all plastic to minimize toxic metal exposure. This, as you can see, requires a fluorescent light in it, but the all glass, at any rate, would protect the aquarium from exposure even to the little bit of metal that are in the contacts here. But that's a fluorescent light, and as you know from buying fluorescents, they come in many different types. You get the warm, white, daylight, and of course, there's a special bulb available that's used for plant growing. It's used for use in the aquarium because whatever is good for growth of terrestrial plants is also good for growth of algae, and that's a prime consideration in any of the aquariums. Probably the best light in terms of light itself, because despite the fact that we need lights on the aquarium for growth of the aquarium in terms of algae and other things, we also want it just for illumination. We want to be able to see in there. Well, the best light comes from white lights in terms of lumens, quantity, amount of light, if you will. White light. You probably ought to combine that with incandescent lighting. That's the screw-in bulb type. Now, if you put an incandescent light over that thin cover that we're talking about, like we just saw here, and trap all that heat in there, they get awful hot, as you know, and you're liable to crack that glass. So be careful about that. Vent it, or better yet, use spotlights. It'll give you a localized algae effect. But this aquarium has been set up quite recently. As you know, with this game that we're into, we've got to reset these constantly. And in the short period of time that this has been up, we can already see an algae growth on the piece on your right there, the one that's sort of sitting there like a mushroom. And it's just starting to get green now. It was dead white on the left side not too long ago, like I say, maybe a week ago. But with the proper amount of lighting, and of course we get a lot of light from overhead here. And I put 3 or 4 fluorescents on there during the off hours. We're getting a good growth of algae, and that's important, the success of the aquarium. We'll see that next time we get together on the salt game, how important that is. You can also, well, let me say that you certainly want to have one of these plant lights, plant-type lights. And they're available at all the pet shops now because of this algae growth. It's so critical. So figure one of those into the scheme of things. You can put black light in the aquarium. That black light puts out ultraviolet, and there's a lot of thought that the ultraviolet penetration into the water, because ultraviolet has very good penetration, helps retard bacterial growth, and it doesn't particularly bother the fish. So black light is a consideration. So a lot of different kinds of lights you can put on the aquarium. It's probably going to end up like so many elements of this hobby. You try this, try that, and you'll finally end up saying, this works for me, so it's right. That's what really this game is all about. You'll find a lot of different philosophies, and really what it's saying is, well, look, I like this because it's working for me. And if it's working, that's good. No question about it. Okay, now, let's talk about filters, because they're critical to the success of the aquarium. Put some of this hardware off the top of it. We've seen these kind of filters before. This is a molded plastic filter with a lot of slits in it, ribs for strength. The water in the operation of this filter goes down through the gravel bed, because this is buried under the gravel, passes through these slits, and then runs along beneath the filter here and comes up from these holes, as you see in the corner here. And that's critical. You notice that hole is quite large in this type of filter. That's where the success lies, because the larger the hole, and the tube size here is almost an inch, the more water you're going to get through this tube. And that's the success of the filtration. Maximum passage of water, because that turns over that surface. And that's where the oxygen exchange takes place. We'll look at this filter more in a minute. We're going to set up on the aquariums, and we'll get around to that. There's another kind of filter we want to talk about, and there's a power filter of a type hanging on the front of this aquarium right here. That's quite a large one, and that's what the important consideration is here, maximum volume. But any of the power filters, like this one, or ones that we looked at before, should be used in connection with the aquarium. After all, we got some things to consider. We want to, besides the biological filtration, which this under gravel filter takes care of, we've got plain mechanical filtration, removal of dirt. You know, the stuff on the bottom of the aquarium, the moam or fish droppings, feces, detritus, whatever you want to call it. I know what you want to call it. We don't call it that here. But you got to get that out of the aquarium. That's what that filter does. Takes out the dirt. Now, that particular one has diatomaceous earth in it as a filtering medium and uses a very fine charcoal powder. The charcoal is an important consideration. As the water ages and starts to turn yellow, that's the result of the formation of some organic dyes in the water. And there's been a lot of thought gone into this, and there's some consideration that those organic dyes or products that come along with them, that are coupled with them, are the growth inhibitors in the aquarium. We want to get that stuff out. Charcoal will take that out. Now, there are other types of power filters, as we talk here. And they use, as a filtering medium, the filter fluff, like we see here, just a strainer, and charcoal, like you see there. I might just mention that besides this, there's another good filter medium you can use, old nylons. Old stockings are excellent filters. But other power filters don't use that diatomaceous earth that we saw some weeks ago, but this kind. But you want to get an outside filter on there. Now, besides that, there are some other things that want to be removed from the aquarium. Let's take a look at a sample here. This is a sample of a skimmer. Now, you see what's in there. You can see that fluid moving around. There are arguments against the use of a skimmer, but I tell you this, if that skimmer wasn't on there, that cup of coffee that's in it would be in the aquarium. That's a good enough argument to have it on there. It's taken something out. And that's a rather fundamental design, that skimmer. It depends on the aeration of the water coming up that tube, and the froth that's generated with the nitrogen compounds in is lighter and rises up on that column and is trapped in that cup. You just dump that out periodically. There are other skimmers that hang right in the aquarium, bigger tubes, but basically the design of the froth is the same. Aquarium, water runs into it through holes in the top, down into this big tube. It's then pumped out from the bottom by your air pump. It also has an air stone in there that is agitating that whole column of water, and we get the same result you saw there. The froth generates upward and collects in a cup, and you dump it out. Generally called a protein skimmer of some kind. A good addition to the hobby. Besides that, we have a consideration of ozonation. There are ozone generators. Now, for all the world, they look like an air pump. And what they're producing is this. Oxygen, like that. Super oxygen, if you will. This is oxygen as a chemical symbol. This is oxygen that we normally think of breathing. Ozone is produced by passing air over a highly charged electrical contacts. And that weird smell you smell sometimes in connection with open machinery running, that's ozone. But this is generally used as a bacterial control. Now, you don't want to bubble ozone into the aquarium. It can be harmful to the fish. It should be done maybe into the filter externally, but not right directly into the aquarium. But that, again, is a skimmer of types. It's in the sense that it kills bacteria, kills parasites. Besides that, there's another approach to the cleansing of the water. Now, this has an ultraviolet light in it. Let me show you what this device is. And this is an ultraviolet sterilizer. You see the water pouring out of this. Now, this is not a water pump. This thing will not pump water by itself. The output from this is coming from this tube right here, which is on the output side of a plain power filter. So you take your power filter, run the tube, instead of running it back into the aquarium when the water is cleansed, you run it through the ultraviolet, and that cleanses it bacterially. Let's take a look at another gadget that's important. I keep going over here. I could have saved 100 trips. Hydrometer. That's a hydrometer. Now, not everybody, a lot of people say, okay, I know what the hydrometer does. It measures salinity. Now, that's not quite what it does. It gives us an indication of salinity, and we'll talk more about this next time. Actually, what this does is measures specific gravity. It tells you how much heavier the salt water is than fresh water. And it's generally standardized at a certain temperature. We'll talk about this later on. Let me just show you one thing about the hydrometer that's important. When you're reading the hydrometer, if this is the water level, and the hydrometer is floating in there like this, let me exaggerate the size of it. There's the hydrometer floating at some level, and this is graduated, marked here so we can read it. Because of the surface tension of the water will generally rise up on the surface like this. So that when you look in there, if you look down from the top of the aquarium, you'll see water up on the hydrometer up to that point. That's not what you want to read. You want to read at the level of the water, which is generally down about a point. So be careful when you're watching. The meniscus here sometimes fools you. You don't want to be reading at the top. Read down at the water level. Okay? Goes without saying, we want a heater in the aquarium. We want a thermometer. And let's get around now to taking a look at the setup of the aquarium itself. I get an aquarium up here. This is a 30-gallon aquarium. And it's quite simple. We just take the filter. The holes for the filter stems go in the back of the aquarium because we want those stems out of the picture. And then we just put these in like this, like so. And of course, you need an air stone in there. That's what's on the end of the gadget here. And we put the cap on, and again, we put this one in place. And we would cut this then to length to suit. But that's basically all you need. Now, what are we going to put in here for gravel? Dolomite. There's dolomite. Here's some other samples of dolomite with other things. Basically, the dolomite is a buffer. If you looked in a dictionary, it would say for dolomite, a brittle calcium magnesium carbonate rock. The purpose is chemical buffering. It keeps the pH up. But that's dolomite, and this is dolomite with crushed coral and dolomite with shells. They all have their purpose because they all contribute to that pH control. Dolomite. A lot of dolomite. Because we want a thick bed of it in this aquarium. Because that's where our biological filter is going to end up being, on that surface. And then we would, of course, get water in there, get lights on as we described, get the full cover on. We put the light on here. And I stopped and talked to a friend of mine in Houston. And old Cal has got his lights on a rheostat, and you can see nighttime coming in his aquarium. Spectacular demonstration, because the fish are all free swimming like we saw. He starts turning those lights down with his rheostat. Night starts coming on, and those fish, every one of them has a bedroom. Unbelievable. Same place every time. He did it over and over again. Every one of those fish into his cubby hole. Safety for the night. There's a lot of things run around the bottom of the ocean, if you will. I was going to say the aquarium, but the ocean. They would eat everything laying there. So lights on a rheostat, got a nice place in the home. Well, we get the aquarium set up. We got to let it age for 4 to 6 weeks. Why? We'll talk about more in the future. But that's the consideration. A lot of work, a little bit of waiting here. There are products that shorten this cycle. Talk to your pet shop operator. We'll be getting around to them very soon. But it's well worth it. If we can end up with all our efforts with something that looks like this, the slice of the bottom, worth all the work we put into it.